present time. The data accumulated by this has been used by them to incredible extent for change, of course, planned change across the whole planet. And you can see why they couldn't disclose this stuff to the public, the general public, because they need you to go along with it in all phases of their great plan, the grand plan, you might call it. Otherwise, you wouldn't go along with it. If you all knew, if your parents knew that your society was just to be utterly destroyed by a Gramsci type scenario, the communist who says, instead of just fighting people physically and so on, he says just come in and gradually take over the functions of culture step by step, and education step by step, and so on, and media, and you can convince the public as they're growing up that and before you know it, in a generation or so, you've completely altered what they were by design, by plan. And so a socialistic, almost communistic type system or way of using techniques was implemented on the public without them even being aware of that's what was happening. They were trained to believe they were fighting communism. But in reality, it was being taught in universities in the Western world, taught openly. And they were recruiting openly too for big changes ahead. The public can't quite get, and most folk today can't get their head around that. Why would your country be fighting communism and yet promoting and even funding its tuition? It's because down the road, you always, through the Hegelian process, you have a synthesis. Remember, you need two sides for change. One side changing you all the time is a tyranny, you see. And if you have two sides, then you think you're fighting a tyranny, and then if you guide the synthesis, basically, you get thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So synthesis is the outcome of the two. So if you guide that along the way, and you guide the arguments, you'll get society to always move in the direction that you want. And you can convince them of pretty well anything by using the right techniques of how to live, how to behave, what's okay, what's acceptable, what isn't acceptable, and keep changing normals all the time until you've got new normals across the board. You can also train them through incredible indoctrination. It's so slickly done that people don't know they're even being indoctrinated through entertainment. Until, in a Pavlovian sense, they'll have incredible reactions if you mention certain even words to them. They'll blush and go into almost, panic if you hear certain terms used and things like that. So it's quite easy to indoctrinate children. Like Bertrand Russell said, give me children young enough, and he said, I could convince them that snow is actually black. Just change the terminology. And if you change terminology, that was a communistic system of using terminology. The Weather Underground were using it to create the terminology, force the public to use the terms, and then when the public try to use the terms, you're accusing them of something, and the public try to use them, it's quite easy for you to disable them by calling them something else or a name or whatever it happens to be. It silences them totally. And we're seeing that all the day as though it's quite natural. And it's working, of course, as it's meant to work. So, as I say, the techniques of this go way back into the 19th century, really. And improved with mass communication and mass study on the public. And since the internet came out, there's never been a time of rapid learning on behalf of those who observers, monitorers, analyzers, etc., with the use of computers. And they don't have to even use as much time on the public. With algorithms, they're rather perfect today. They can actually suss out different people's communications and categorize you all in real time very quickly, boom, 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 any pigeonholes. And that's what governments are all using across the board. And it won't get better. It won't get better at all, because they're using algorithms now, and lots of scientific papers out where eventually computers, the computerized system, and artificial intelligence will be running your lives and making the decisions, not just on your behalf, but for you, whether you like it or not, in a very authoritative fashion. And it'll be harder, you see, if you've been targeted for because of your social credit system being not up to par, or you've got opinions that a tyrannical government doesn't like, then you're going to have a hard time of it. You'll have no humans to contact to complain about something. They'll just say, well, it's all done by computer because it's out of our hands. It's perfect, isn't it? Who are you going to complain to? It's quite amazing to me, because if you can't have opinions, it doesn't, and you don't have to be violent with your opinions, you just have to have opinions. You don't have a free society. In a free society, you got all kinds of opinions. People will get upset, and you'll get upset yourself at times, but that's what freedom is. If you're forced into a singular technique under the guise of keeping the peace, or whatever it happens to be, you're in a Soviet-type system, because they were imprisoning people under psychiatric terms for years. There's books out on it. They called it, you were inflexible. You were socially inflexible in your opinions. And that was a mental illness, you see. And you couldn't complain about the system of communism, because it was obviously the most perfect utopia in the world, as it was taught to everybody, you see. You must be mad if you didn't like it. We're seeing the same techniques used across the world now. And China is using it to a really good effect with their social credit system. There's some good publications out on it now in good detail on how it's used on the people. And really, a few literally have broken one of the taboos there. They're not crimes, they're taboos, but because they're taboos, like a thought of something, or not quite up there, or worshipping the party's stance on whatever it happens to be, you'll get blacklisted, and you can't even travel in. You can't even go through doors in a library or in all there is banned from them all automatically. And that's coming, of course, to the West too, for those who haven't picked up on it. It's so interesting, as I've said before, of the warnings we had back in the 80s and the 90s of what was to come, when people could put out good scientific projections from good sources on the dangers of all of this coming computerization and data collection and so on. Most folk, again, because they're nice people, would say, oh, we understand that could be done, but they, it's almost the they word, meaning authorities, they would never do the nasty things to us. But why wouldn't they do that? Power. You have to, again, just like the Royal Institute for International Affairs, who saw the people under them vastly different from the people who live inside a population. We really had affinity with each other. They had no affinity, that class. They really didn't have any affinity with anything below them. And they thought that was the natural order. They really believed it. It's the same thing with those in charge of technology today. They truly believe they're like gods because they're up there and they have the money and the power and the ownership of big corporations over systems which they've made essential in today's society. They've made it essential. Governments now demand you pay taxes on computers now and so on, rather than just send them checks. And you're being forced into a system to use this system. So if you start to get banned from that system or punished or from the system, well, you're going to be in dire straits, even to get money or to get bills paid or wherever it happens to be. That's part of the social credit system. The very system that again, Lord Bertrand Russell talked about in the 40s and 50s, when he said eventually a system would come in where the central authority, which would be presumed could be sort of a governmental authority, it doesn't have to be government. If you notice, most government today is farmed out to agencies. And if they put out a credit system, like a moneyed system, a credit system for everyone in the future, getting away from the so-called free enterprise system, which is never free and it's only enterprising for a few. In reality, if they put out a rationing system down the road, which they want to do, by the way, after the next crash, and it's not surmising on my part, it's from publications from many of the big think tanks on this. They want to do this. It's always been their goal. Russell said, it'll arrive into your bank accounts one day and you can't save them up. So you have to use these credits. It'll be the same every month. And if you've been bad, and I mean bad by being antisocial, meaning you haven't conformed to whatever opinion or whatever it happens to be for that week or month, then they'll ban you from using it or withdrawing from it. And at the end of the month, by the way, even if you are supposedly good in quotation marks, you can't save any of it up. You got to use it on the month, or it starts in the same amount of money or credits every month. When you read the books by Bertrand Russell, remembering that he belonged to a lot of global think tanks in his day, which implemented policies for the future, talking about a universal credit system issued by the government, and then you see the implementation of testing systems across the world now of universal basic income models by the government. You realize that the present was planned about 70 years ago in many different areas, not just in that one. This is all old planning that you're seeing come into play now as we wait for the next big crash. Crashes are planned, and they're consented to by those in charge of it all. Money's backed by nothing. If they wanted to go on for another 100 years this way, they would just make, well, in 100 years you'd be earning a few $1 million a year each. But you'll be living in a system where it'll be quite a few $1,000s for a cup of coffee, etc. As they inflate the currency, make it worth less and less and less.
Maybe for reason of terror, or crime, or hacktivist, or any other reason, I wouldn't start to penetrate the site based on physical, because I'm more exposed. It may be risky. I would probably start with cyber.
So how did Israel become a cyber empire?
Basically, the advantage of being in Israel is that through the army, we are getting the technology, the minds, the skills of the people, and therefore there are a lot of investments in this area coming from everywhere.
I would say that in general, if you look at our area of business, nobody even started to think about cybersecurity 5 years ago. Lately, we have realized that actually protecting physical sites without giving the umbrella of cyber just doesn't make sense.
And is there an end game to this new war zone?
No, there is no end game that I foresee in the future years. As long as everything is becoming digital, our household, everything in the world is becoming digital, I see that cyber will be live and even more and more sophisticated.